A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
Hey everyone, welcome back to My Weird Prompts. I am Corn Poppleberry, and I am sitting here in our living room in Jerusalem with my brother. It is a bit of a heavy morning here. You can feel the tension in the air, even just looking out the window toward the old city.
Herman Poppleberry, reporting for duty. It is good to be back at the microphones, though I agree, Corn, the atmosphere is thick. Our housemate Daniel sent us a fascinating prompt this morning that really hits close to home, especially given the headlines we've been seeing over the last few weeks. It is a deep dive into what policy wonks call the cold peace.
It really does hit home. Daniel was asking us to deconstruct the concept of the cold peace, specifically how the peace treaties Israel has with Egypt and Jordan actually function when the public sentiment is, to put it mildly, incredibly hostile. We are talking about agreements that have lasted 30 to 50 years, yet as we sit here in March of 2026, they feel like they are perpetually on the brink of a total freeze.
It is the ultimate geopolitical paradox. Most people think of peace as a binary. You are either at war or you are friends. You are shooting or you are hugging. But the Middle East has pioneered this third category. It is a functional, state-level architecture that operates almost entirely independently of what the average person on the street in Cairo or Amman thinks. I like to think of it as a high-tech machine running in a deep freezer. It is cold, it is brittle in places, and it is covered in frost, but it keeps the lights on. It is a specialized, high-friction tool for managing neighbors who, frankly, would rather not be neighbors.
And that is exactly what we're going to dig into today. We are going to look at why these treaties are surviving the massive pressures of 2026, from the standoff at the Philadelphia corridor to the existential anxieties in the Jordan Valley. We will look at the security glue holding them together, and, perhaps more importantly, the economic handcuffs that make walking away from these deals almost impossible for our neighbors. We are going to ask the hard question, is this elite-level model actually sustainable in an age of rising populism and social media?
We have a lot of ground to cover. We are going to look at the legacy of Anwar Sadat, the role of natural gas as a regional stabilizer, and whether this cold peace model is actually a better blueprint for the future than the warmer normalization we saw with the Abraham Accords. We will also touch on some of our previous discussions, like episode 555, where we talked about the new axis, to see how these old treaties fit into the new world order.
Let us start with the definition. When we say cold peace, we are talking specifically about the 1979 treaty with Egypt and the 1994 treaty with Jordan. These are formal, legal, and internationally recognized peace agreements. They ended the state of war. But if you visit Cairo or Amman as an Israeli today, you are not exactly greeted with open arms. There is no cultural exchange to speak of, no shared cinema festivals, and the professional unions in those countries basically ban their members from interacting with Israelis under threat of expulsion.
Right? It is a piece of the elites. It is a piece of the generals, the intelligence officers, and the energy ministers. It is what I call managed non-belligerence. In 1979, when Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat signed the Camp David Accords, there was a brief shining hope for something warmer. But Sadat was assassinated in 1981, largely because of that treaty. That event sent a shockwave through the Arab world that still dictates policy 45 years later. The lesson learned by his successor, Hosni Mubarak, and now President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, was that you can have peace with Israel to secure your borders and your relationship with Washington, but you must keep it at arm's length from your own people to survive politically.
It is a survival strategy, and we see the same thing in Jordan with King Abdullah II. But what is interesting is that even though the rhetoric from these governments has become incredibly sharp lately, I mean, we are seeing words like genocide and sanctions coming out of official channels. The actual cooperation on the ground has rarely been more intense. Herman, you have been looking at the security side of this. Why is the military-to-military relationship so resilient when the diplomatic side looks like it is falling apart?
It comes down to shared threats and the cold reality of geography. For Egypt, the peace treaty turned a hostile border into a secure one, allowing them to focus their military resources on their western border with Libya and their internal security. But more specifically, look at the Sinai Peninsula. For years, Israel and Egypt have cooperated deeply to fight Islamic State insurgents in the Sinai. Israel actually allowed Egypt to move more troops and heavy equipment into the Sinai than the original treaty technically allowed through the agreed activities mechanism. Both sides knew that a stable Sinai was in their mutual interest.
But that brings us to the current friction point in March of 2026, the Philadelphia Corridor. For those who do not know, that is the narrow 14-kilometer strip of land between Gaza and Egypt. Israel is currently refusing to withdraw from that strip, citing the need to prevent smuggling, while Egypt claims this is a direct violation of the security annex of the 1979 treaty.
It is a massive test for the cold peace. Egypt has to protest publicly. They have even moved a significant number of troops closer to the border, the most substantial shift we have seen in decades. But behind the scenes, the communication channels between the Israeli Defense Forces and the Egyptian General Intelligence Service are still open 24/7. Why? Because Egypt does not want a collapse of the treaty any more than Israel does. If the treaty fails, Egypt loses its primary conduit to the United States military aid, which is worth over $1 billion a year. They lose their status as a regional mediator. They lose the stability that has defined their eastern flank for 47 years.
It is a game of chicken, but both drivers are wearing seatbelts and driving cars they cannot afford to wreck. Now, Jordan is a different story. The 1994 Wadi Araba Treaty feels even more fragile right now. We have talked about this in previous episodes, like episode 555, where we discussed the new axis, but the pressure on King Abdullah is immense.
Jordan is the most sensitive player in this entire equation. Between 50 and 70% of the Jordanian population is of Palestinian origin. So, whenever there is tension in the West Bank or Gaza, it is not just a foreign policy issue for the king, it is a domestic security issue. If the West Bank destabilizes, Jordan destabilizes. The king's greatest fear is what they call al-Watan al-Badil, the alternative homeland theory. The idea that Israel will eventually try to push the Palestinian population across the river into Jordan.
And that is why we are seeing such a shift in their rhetoric. Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi has been calling for international sanctions against Israel recently. That is a huge departure from the quiet diplomacy that defined the era of King Hussein. The king himself has warned that if Israel moves toward formal annexation of the Jordan Valley, the treaty could be suspended. This is not just posturing. For them, the Jordan Valley is the ultimate tripwire.
But here is the thing, Korn. Despite that rhetoric, the security cooperation in the Jordan Valley remains the bedrock of Jordan's national security. The Jordan River is the longest border Israel has, and it is remarkably quiet. Why? Because the Jordanian military and the Israeli military work together to prevent smuggling and infiltration. If that cooperation stops, the Hashemite kingdom faces a massive threat from Iranian-backed groups trying to use Jordan as a transit point to flood the West Bank with weapons. The king knows that the Israeli security umbrella is part of what keeps his throne secure against those who would see Jordan become another province of the Iranian Axis.
So it is a functional necessity disguised as a diplomatic disaster. But it is not just about guns and borders anymore. This is where the topic gets really interesting for me. In the last decade, we have seen the emergence of what I call the economic handcuffs. We are talking about energy and water. This is the part of the machine that people rarely see, but it is the part that generates the most heat.
This is the real stabilizer. This is what makes the Cold Peace different in 2026 than it was in 1986. Back then, the treaties were purely about security. Today, they are about the very survival of the civilian infrastructure in Egypt and Jordan. We are talking about a level of dependency that is almost impossible to unwind.
Let us talk numbers. Jordan is one of the most water-stressed countries in the world. They rely on Israel for 200 million cubic meters of water annually. That is not a small amount. That is a life-sustaining amount. If that water stops flowing, the taps in Amman go dry in a matter of days. You cannot run a country. You cannot keep a population from revolting without water. It is the ultimate leverage.
And then you have the gas. The Leviathan and Tamar offshore gas fields have completely changed the regional map. Jordan signed a $10 billion deal to buy Israeli natural gas to power their electricity grid. Egypt, which used to export gas to Israel 20 years ago, is now part of a $35 billion deal where they import Israeli gas, liquefy it at their plants in Idku and Damietta, and then export it to Europe. This has turned Israel from an energy island into a regional energy hub.
I was reading a report the other day about Chevron's role in this. As a major player in the Eastern Mediterranean gas fields, Chevron acts as a sort of non-state stabilizer. They have invested billions in infrastructure that physically connects Israel, Jordan, and Egypt. You cannot just flip a switch and undo that infrastructure. It creates a cost of exit that is prohibitively expensive. If Egypt cancels the deal, they lose billions in transit fees and their status as an energy gateway to Europe.
Imagine you are the king of Jordan. You are furious about Israeli policy in the West Bank. Your public is protesting in the streets. You want to tear up the treaty. But if you do, 40% of your electricity goes out because the gas stops flowing, and your people start dying of thirst because the water stops. The political cost of the treaty is high, but the physical cost of breaking it is a total state collapse. That is the genius, or the tragedy, depending on how you look at it, of the cold peace architecture. It is peace through dependency.
It is very different from the Abraham Accords, which we discussed in episode 928. The Abraham Accords with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain are built on a model of normalization, shared innovation, and warm relations. There is a lot of people-to-people interaction. But those countries do not share a border with Israel. They do not have the same existential security baggage that Egypt and Jordan have.
That is a crucial distinction. The Abraham Accords are a luxury. They are about growth and prosperity. The Egypt and Jordan treaties are a necessity. They are about survival. You can survive without a flight from Tel Aviv to Dubai. You cannot survive a hot war on your immediate border while your economy is collapsing. This is why the cold peace model, despite its lack of warmth, is actually much more foundational to Israel's regional standing. It is the floor. The Abraham Accords are the ceiling.
But is it sustainable in the long term? We are seeing a rise in populism across the Middle East. In 2026, social media makes it very hard for leaders to maintain this elite-level cooperation, while their public is seeing images of conflict every day on their phones. The street has more power than it did in 1979.
That is the big question. We are seeing a real strain on the Sadat legacy. For decades, the Egyptian and Jordanian leadership could count on a certain level of apathy or control over their populations. But the digital age has changed that. The gap between the state and the street is wider than ever. When Ayman Safadi uses such harsh language, he is trying to bridge that gap. He is trying to show the public that the government shares their anger, even while the technicians are still coordinating the water flow at the border.
It is a performance, a necessary performance, but performances can sometimes take on a life of their own. If the Israeli government moves forward with annexation in the West Bank, particularly the Jordan Valley, the King of Jordan might be forced into a corner where even the water and gas are not enough to justify the treaty. The Jordan Valley is the ultimate tripwire because it represents the end of the two-state solution for Jordan.
We should talk about why the Jordan Valley matters so much in this cold peace context. For Jordan, the Jordan Valley is not just a piece of land. It is the buffer that prevents Jordan from becoming the alternative Palestinian state. There is a long-standing fear in the Hashemite kingdom that if Israel annexes the West Bank, they will eventually try to push the Palestinian population into Jordan. If that happens, the Hashemite monarchy is finished. That is why they call it an existential threat.
And on the Israeli side, the Jordan Valley is seen as the essential security border. This is the conservative worldview in action. You cannot have a defensible border without control of the high ground and the valley. So you have two sides that both see the same piece of land as essential for their survival, but for completely opposite reasons. It is the ultimate paradox. The treaty is what manages that friction, but the friction is what threatens the treaty.
It is like a pressure cooker. The valve is the security cooperation, but the heat is the political reality. As long as the valve stays open, the pot does not explode. But if the valve gets clogged by a major policy shift like annexation, the whole thing could go. And we have to remember the role of the January 2025 ceasefire. That agreement was supposed to stabilize things, but the standoff over the Philadelphia corridor has turned it into a source of new tension.
Let us pivot back to Egypt for a second. We mentioned the Sharm el-Sheikh summit from October 2025. That was a really interesting moment. Even in the middle of all the tension over the Gaza border, President Sisi still hosted a major summit to discuss regional stability. It shows that Egypt still sees itself as the indispensable mediator. They need that role to maintain their international standing.
They have to. Egypt's regional power is tied to their relationship with Israel. If they are not the ones who can talk to both the Israelis and the Palestinians, their value to the United States and the rest of the world drops significantly. Sisi is a pragmatist. He is a military man who understands that a war with Israel would be catastrophic for Egypt's already fragile economy. Remember, Egypt is struggling with massive inflation and debt. They need the gas revenue, they need the Suez Canal traffic, and they need the American aid.
So the cold peace is actually a form of economic protection for them. It is quite a shift from the 1960s when the rhetoric was about driving Israel into the sea. Now it is about making sure the gas pipelines stay pressurized. It is a much more sober, if less romantic, version of geopolitics. It is engineering, Herman.
It is exactly engineering corn. That is how I think of it. It is engineering sovereignty. We actually did an episode on this, episode 544, where we looked at the literal nuts and bolts of a two-state geography. The same logic applies to the cold peace. It is about building enough interconnected systems that the cost of conflict becomes irrational. You build a web of pipes, wires, and intelligence feeds that are so tangled you cannot cut one without feeling the pain in all of them.
But humans are not always rational, Herman. That is the flaw in the engineering model. A single event, a single assassination, or a single massive protest could force a leader's hand. Look at what happened in the Arab Spring. We saw how quickly established orders can crumble when the street reaches a breaking point. If the public in Cairo or Amman decides that their dignity is worth more than their gas supply, the whole architecture could collapse.
You are right. And that is why the Israeli security establishment is so focused on maintaining those quiet channels. They know that the public rhetoric is meant for a domestic audience. They do not get offended by it. They expect it. The danger is when people start believing their own rhetoric. If the Jordanian parliament, which is very anti-Israel, manages to force a vote that actually compels the king to act, we are in a whole new world.
Let us talk about the role of the United States in this. We have a pro-American, pro-Israel worldview here, and it is clear that the United States is the guarantor of these treaties. The Camp David Accords were a massive win for American diplomacy, bringing Egypt out of the Soviet orbit and into the Western one.
It was a tectonic shift, and it is still the foundation of American policy in the region. The United States provides the military aid that acts as the carrot, and the diplomatic pressure that acts as the stick. If the cold peace fails, it is not just a failure for Israel and its neighbors, it is a massive blow to American prestige and interests in the Middle East. It would signal the end of the American-led regional order.
Which is why the United States has been so active in trying to resolve the Philadelphia corridor standoff. They know that if Egypt feels backed into a corner, the 1979 treaty is the first thing that starts to crack. And once that crack starts, it is very hard to stop it. They are trying to find a technical solution, sensors, underground barriers, international observers, to replace the physical presence of Israeli troops.
There is also the broader regional context. We discussed this in episode 1011, the security paradox with Russia and China. As Israel and its neighbors navigate a world where the United States is seen as less reliable or more focused on Asia, these regional treaties become even more important. If you cannot rely on a superpower to keep the peace, you have to rely on the cold, hard facts of your own interdependence. You have to be your own stabilizer.
It is a move toward regionalism, but it is a very tense version of it. I want to go back to something you said earlier about the Abraham Accords. Do you think the cold peace model is actually more durable because it is built on these hard dependencies? Or is the Abraham Accords model better because it tries to build actual friendship?
It is a great question. I think the cold peace is more resilient in a crisis, but the Abraham Accords have a higher ceiling for growth. In a crisis, people-to-people ties are the first things to go. Tourists stop flying. Businesses stop collaborating because of the optics. But the water does not stop flowing unless you physically turn the valve, and the security officers still have each other's cell phone numbers. The cold peace is built for the storm. The Abraham Accords are built for the sunshine.
That is a good way to put it. The problem is that in the Middle East, there is a lot more storm than sunshine. So maybe the cold peace is the more realistic template for the rest of the region. If we ever see a deal with Saudi Arabia, for example, it will probably look a lot more like a warm version of the cold peace than a full-blown normalization right away. It will be about security and technology first, and public buy-in much later.
Saudi Arabia is the big prize, and they are watching the Egypt and Jordan models very closely. They see how Sisi and Abdullah manage the domestic pressure. They see the benefits of the security cooperation, but they also see the political cost. For the Saudis, any deal would have to have very clear benefits for the Palestinian issue, because they see themselves as the leaders of the Islamic world. They cannot afford a peace that is as cold as the one Egypt has, but they might need the same kind of security dependency foundation.
It is about the optics. In the cold peace, the optics are terrible, but the mechanics are great. In the Abraham Accords, the optics are great, and the mechanics are getting there. The challenge for the future is how to combine the two. How do you get the security and economic depth of the cold peace with at least a little bit of the public buy-in of the Abraham Accords? Can you have a sustainable peace without the people?
I'm not sure you can, Korn. At least not as long as the core conflict remains unresolved. Until then, the cold peace is the best we can hope for with our immediate neighbors, and we should not underestimate how valuable it is. Think about the alternative. Think about the billions of dollars and thousands of lives that would have been lost if Israel had been at war with Egypt and Jordan for the last 40 years. The cold peace has saved this region from total ruin, even if it has not brought the harmony people dreamed of on the White House lawn.
It is a success of lowered expectations. And in geopolitics, sometimes that is the only kind of success you get. I want to shift gears and look at the practical takeaways for our listeners. If you are trying to understand the news coming out of this region in 2026, what should you be looking for? What are the real indicators of health for these treaties?
First, watch the energy infrastructure. If you see reports of gas shipments being interrupted or water deals being renegotiated, that is a much bigger deal than a fiery speech at the United Nations or a protest in Amman. The physical links are the true pulse of the relationship. If the gas stops, the treaty is in the hospital.
Second, look at the security coordination in the Jordan Valley. If the Israeli and Jordanian militaries stop talking, that is the red alert. As long as they are still patrolling together and sharing intelligence to stop Iranian smuggling, the treaty is alive, no matter what the politicians are saying for the cameras.
And third, pay attention to the role of third parties like Chevron or the United States. These treaties do not exist in a vacuum. They are supported by a whole ecosystem of international interests that have a massive stake in keeping the cold peace from turning into a hot war. If the U.S. pulls back its military aid to Egypt, that is a major destabilizer.
It is also worth thinking about what this means for the future of the region. If the cold peace model is the only one that works for bordering states, then we have to accept that peace in the Middle East is going to be a very clinical, technical affair for a long time. It is not going to be about handshakes. It is going to be about pipeline pressure and border patrol protocols. It is a piece of the technicians.
And maybe that is okay. Maybe we need to stop looking for a transformative peace and start looking for a functional one. If we can manage the conflict well enough that people can live their lives and the economies can grow, that is a huge win. The cold peace is a tool for management, not a solution for reconciliation. It is about preventing the worst-case scenario, not achieving the best-case one.
It is a sobering thought, but a necessary one. We often get caught up in the high-flown rhetoric of peace, but the reality is much more mundane. It is about water, gas, and security. It is about the things that people need to survive, even if they do not like the people providing them. It is the ultimate form of pragmatism.
It is also a testament to the durability of state interests. Governments come and go, leaders are assassinated, but the geography does not change. The need for water does not change. The need for a secure border does not change. These treaties have survived because they are rooted in those unchanging realities, not in the shifting sands of public opinion.
I think that is a good place to start wrapping up this part of the discussion. We have looked at the historical roots, the security architecture, and the economic handcuffs. We have seen how the Cold Peace is being tested in 2026 and why it is likely to survive despite the intense pressure from the street and the friction in the Jordan Valley.
It is a resilient model, even if it is an uncomfortable one. And as we look toward the rest of the year, these relationships will continue to be the anchor of Israel's regional strategy. Whether it is managing the border with Gaza or the tensions in the West Bank, the treaties with Egypt and Jordan are the foundation that everything else is built on. Without them, the entire region falls into a much darker place.
Before we finish up, I want to remind everyone that if you are interested in these topics, we have a whole archive of episodes that dive into the nuances of Middle Eastern geopolitics. You can find them all at myweirdprompts.com. We have covered everything from the engineering of sovereignty to the shifting alliances of the new Axis.
And if you have been enjoying the show, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other people find the show and join the conversation. We love seeing the community grow and hearing your feedback on these complex issues.
We also have a Telegram channel if you want to get notified as soon as a new episode drops. Just search for My Weird Prompts on Telegram. It is a great way to stay connected and make sure you never miss a deep dive into the mechanics of our world.
We want to thank Daniel for sending in this prompt. It gave us a lot to chew on today. It is easy to get lost in the daily headlines, but taking a step back to look at the structural mechanics of these treaties is really important for understanding the bigger picture of why things are the way they are.
It really is. The Cold Peace is one of those things that most people take for granted until it is threatened. But when you look under the hood, you realize just how complex and essential it actually is. It is a machine that has been running for decades, and while it might be cold, it is still working. It is the quiet engine of regional stability.
Let us leave it there for today. Any final thoughts, Corn?
Just that we should keep an eye on the Jordan Valley. That seems to be the pivot point for the next few months. If the Cold Peace can survive a major move there, it can probably survive anything. It is the ultimate test of the handcuff model.
Agreed. The next few months will be a masterclass in crisis management for both Israel and Jordan. We will be right here to track it and break it down for you.
Thanks for listening to my weird prompts. I am Corn Poppleberry.
And I am Herman Poppleberry. We will see you next time.
Peace is a complicated word, but as long as the water is flowing and the gas is pumping, there is at least a version of it that holds.
A functional version. And in this part of the world, functional is a lot better than the alternative.
Well said. Alright, heading over to myweirdprompts.com for the RSS feed and more. We will catch you all in the next episode.
Stay curious, everyone.
And keep those prompts coming. We love digging into the weird and the complex. This has been My Weird Prompts.
Until next time, stay safe and stay informed.
Bye for now.
Goodbye.
Just thinking about that $35 billion gas deal again. It is incredible how much that changes the leverage in the room. When you are talking about that kind of money and that much energy, the political posturing starts to look a lot more like theater.
It is the ultimate insurance policy. Egypt's economy is so tied to that energy hub status now. If they lose the Israeli gas, they lose their ability to export to Europe, and they lose a massive source of hard currency. It is a straitjacket made of gold. They might hate the deal, but they love the revenue.
And for Israel, it is not just about the money. It is about the integration. For decades, the goal was to not be isolated in the region. Now, we are so integrated into the energy grid of our neighbors that we are part of their vital organs. You cannot cut out a vital organ without killing the patient. It is a brutal form of peace, but it is effective.
That is the shift from 1979 to 2026. We went from a piece of paper to a piece of pipes. And pipes are much harder to tear up than paper. They are buried deep in the ground and the seabed.
It is a fascinating evolution. I am glad we got to dive into it today. It definitely helps put the recent tensions into perspective. It is not just about the rhetoric. It is about the reality of the infrastructure.
All right, let us actually wrap it up this time.
Right. Thanks again for listening. We will be back soon with another deep dive.
See you then.
This has been episode 1111 of My Weird Prompts. We are officially in the quadruple digits for a while now.
It is a lot of talking, Corn.
And a lot of learning. Catch you later, Herman.
Later, Corn.
One last thing, just for the listeners. If you are looking for that contact form to send us your own weird prompts, it is right there on the homepage of the website. We read every single one of them.
We really do. Some of our best episodes have come from your questions, so do not be shy.
All right, now we're really going. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the close from sloth, from man, from long-eared host. My Weird Prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep weirding.